Hello and welcome to this edition of R&B Reviews. I'm Rob, and since Public Enemies will be coming out very soon, I thought it would be very interesting to watch two earlier adaptations on John Dillinger's life. One version that was made in 1945 and a second version that was made in 1973. Okay, so let's start with the 1945 version. This version was made by a film company called Monogram Pictures studio that specialized in making some very, very cheap, low-budget films, comedies, crime films mostly, and it's the studio where horror icon Bela Lugosi made some of his films when he was past his peak. The film stars Lawrence Tierney as the hard-headed, cocky, cold John Dillinger. The film focuses mostly on his earlier career at the beginning. It starts where John Dillinger is going to prison for the first time, and he comes across an older criminal by the name of Specs, played by Edmund Lowe. The two start to kind of hit off, and when Dillinger is released, he decides to let Specs and a couple other key criminals that are in the prison escape. They form a gang, and they start their bank robbing. Something interesting I liked about it was it does what a lot of gangster films do and shows the characters from the bottom rising to the top. And it was interesting to see old versus new with this film because Specs is a more experienced criminal, but Dillinger thinks Specs' ideas at robbing banks and doing whatever is very old-fashioned, and whenever he tries to give Specs new ideas, Specs thinks that they're not very good, and Dillinger really has to fight in order to get his ideas accepted. Overall, I thought the movie was pretty decent, but it felt like a crime doesn't pay film, a series of shorts that were made in the 1940s where it would focus on someone committing a crime and they would get a punishment at the end. And I think one of the reasons why I felt that way is because at the beginning, an actor playing John Dillinger's father comes out and he's like, "I'm John Dillinger's father. I don't know how this could have happened. He was like the other boys. He did the same things the other boys did and all this other stuff." And because the film was made by a cheap movie studio, Monogram, the sets weren't realistic. There were a lot of back projections, and actually this film didn't feel like it was set in the 1930s. It felt like it was set in the 1940s. And but overall, I think the acting was actually not too bad. I think Lawrence Tierney made a great, hard-headed, cold, cocky Dillinger, and Edmund Lowe, who plays Specs, was excellent in the film. Unfortunately, a lot of the other characters felt like cardboard characters, like Anne Jeffries, who plays his girlfriend, hardly does anything except stand around and look pretty until like the last 15 minutes of the movie. Overall, I thought the movie was okay, but I can't help but think that if this movie was made at a movie studio that had a bigger budget, a major movie studio, I think this film could have been hailed as a classic. Now, the 1973 version I thought was a much better film. It stars Warren Oates as the boastful Dillinger, and this film is set again in the 1930s, but this time it feels like you are in the 1930s. The dialogue sounds like something that you would hear from that time, and the locations feel like the real thing. Like the towns, the cities, the farms, they all feel like it's like you're actually there. Instead of watching the screen, it's like you're there. And the film, as a result, felt more authentic to me. And this film focuses mostly on the later part of Dillinger's criminal career. Another thing I liked about this movie was you got to know the people in the FBI who wanted Dillinger, such as Melvin Purvis, and how he felt about Dillinger was very interesting. The film would rotate between Dillinger and his gang and the FBI, and I thought it balanced everything out. Like, you got to see a little bit of both sides. And John Dillinger, I felt, was a little bit more developed in this film than in the first film. Here, he seems very frustrated when people don't know him, and also the girlfriend in the film, played by Michelle Phillips, was much better developed here. She actually had real characteristics, and the gunfights were very graphic, they were well photographed, and they were staged spectacularly. And Oates gave a really great performance. I felt like I was watching Dillinger himself because of that. And I also noticed with this movie that the score felt like it was from the 1930s. Like you're hearing songs like Red River Valley on the guitar and on the banjo, and it really complemented the picture very well. And the gang members didn't really feel like cardboard characters like in the first film. They each had their own characteristics and their own personalities. But there were some problems I had with this film, and it was surprisingly with the gun battles, which I thought were done very well. For example, I thought there were times with the movie that I had a hard time telling some of the gang members apart because they dressed so similarly, and there were some inaccuracies such as when certain members died. And also during the fights, the gang seems to unable to get hit with bullets except when a member dies in order to move the plot along, and the police always seem to be the ones to get hit the most. Overall, between these two film versions, I probably recommend the 1973 version the most. I felt this one felt more authentic. It felt like it was like you were in the 1930s, but if you want to go rent both films and watch them back to back like I did, they make a very interesting comparison. So if you want to leave any comments, any feedback, that would be greatly appreciated. And we'll see you on the next edition of R&B Reviews.